Thank you for coming. Reverend Lonnie Bullock, would you make him welcome, please? I did. You good? All right. Hey, it's good to be here and to meet some of you for the first time, and some of you that I saw on Zoom call. To see me actually in person look a little different than on Zoom. I'm about zoomed out. I don't know about you all, but I am so tired of Zoom meetings. Last count, we've done 375 of them in the last 2 years, and I am just done with all of that. So it's good to be here. Sorry it's taken so long to get this to you. Our intention is always 4 to 6 weeks after the assessment weekend, and it's been about 3 months now, simply a lot of different factors. Some of it was getting material back on time, and then, as some of you know, this COVID thing hit our house, and I got the privilege to be in bed for 6 weeks and walk my way through that healing process. And but it's all good. It was just a nuisance. I never got real sick like some of my friends have. It was just a nuisance. The physical exhaustion was real, and the cough was even more real. That's what took so long for me to get back on the road again to do that. And then we got into Christmas time, and so here we are, finally, to share the report. It's they were here for about 2.5 years, actually did a little work with youth back then, and so anyway, it's just good. We've been here for worship and visiting the kids and all of those kind of things. They now live in Boise, Idaho, so they decided to leave the California experience and do something different, and so there they are. But it's always good to be back in Southern California. My brother-in-law lived just up the road a little ways at San Juan Capistrano for 16 years, so we've been in the area a lot and doing that. As Wes mentioned, my background is Church of the Nazarene. I was a pastor for 24 years, mostly in Indiana and Michigan, and now for the last 22 years, it's hard to believe it's been that long, but 22 years I've been connected with NCS, New Church Specialties when we started, now Next Step Church Services. Our whole focus is to help churches ask and discover what's next. Because life is just in transition all the time, right? God prepared us for this moment almost 3 years ago. That's started having conversations about the future of the ministry and what we believe God was asking us to do. And so we began to formulate and put together Next Step Church Services as our way to do that, having no idea of the impact that COVID would have on churches across the United States, asking what's next. And so it's just, I believe God was in the middle of that. See, I'm one of those that just is convinced that God is never caught off guard nor surprised by what happens. He's right in the middle of all that, and he's preparing us for this moment if we'll just let him and to be obedient. So it's a great privilege for me now. These 22 years, we worked in over 11,000 churches. It's just hard to believe for me. And 40 different denominational families in 30 different world areas. Who'd have thought it? You know, if you'd ever, if you'd have said to me as a teenager, well, you'd had to wait until I got to be a Christian, but in the early days of being a Christian, that this is what I'd be doing with my life right now, I'd say you're crazy. I'm a product of bus ministry. So a bus showed up in our neighborhood and picked a bunch of kids up and brought us to Sunday school. And as a result, got introduced to the Church of the Nazarene. And the rest is history. You know, a lot more years than I want to admit these days as to what that looks like. And now here I am, in Marietta. Who would have ever thought that? I didn't even know there was a Marietta. My whole world was Indiana. So, California is where all the loose nuts went to. And so, it was just weird, back then. I didn't realize there were normal people that lived in both coasts. It's just a kind of a growing experience of what that looks like. And what I've learned is all across the United States, there are people who are in love with Jesus and want to make a difference and build the kingdom. And man, that's exciting. And so for the last 22 years I've given my life, as long as God gives us opportunity and voice, to call the church back to the heart of Jesus and to reach lost and broken people. See, the only reason we exist is because we believe lost and broken people matter to God. And if they matter to God, they should matter to us. And if they matter to us, we should be willing to adjust our lives and do whatever it's going to take to reach lost and broken people. That adjustment for me has led me to this ministry and what God seems to be doing. Now, I've had the opportunity now for the last several years to do hundreds of these assessment reports in different sizes of churches, in different locations, in different communities, in different places. And every time I do it, I get to discover the uniqueness of every local congregation. That's been probably the most fulfilling part of this job, because every church has a culture, every church has a uniqueness, and what we want to do is help the church discover and live in its uniqueness in reaching lost and broken people. We don't anticipate that every church is going to be the same. That'd be pretty boring, right? It's every unique church working together in its little corner of the world to make kingdom impact. So that's what we want to do tonight, is to share with you what we call the assessment, but really is discovering some of the challenges and some of the strengths and some of the great things, as well as some of those areas that we need to pay attention to if we're really going to reach lost and broken people. And so tonight I get a chance to do that. As Wes mentioned, I live in Arizona now. We've been there for about 17 years. We're getting ready to relocate to Idaho. Don't ask me why, except grandkids. That's the only reason. It's cold there, it's snowy there. I was just there meeting with our builder and our design team over there, and I froze to death. So, but that's where our grandkids are, so that's it's pretty attractive, right? And so we're relocating right now. But several years ago now, I had the opportunity to do an assessment report in a town near us called Scottsdale. And in Scottsdale, we had a Nazarene church that was going through its own unique struggles and trying to figure out what to do and what's next for them. And so we did an assessment. I delivered the assessment report, and I made my way back home. It's always fun to do a report in your hometown. You know, you don't have to stay in a motel. You don't have to get on an airplane. You just drive in your own bed. It's really cool. But anyway, I got home. It's probably 9:30 or 10 o'clock. Pulled into my driveway, and I began to have pains in my chest like I never had before. I thought, this is weird. What is that? And so I got in, and it didn't go away. And so I went upstairs. My wife was already in bed, and I woke her up. I said, Karen, I think you need to get up. Something's not right. So she got up, and by the time she came downstairs, the pain had gone away. So I thought, no big deal, right? It's no big deal. We'll just forget it. We'll just ignore it. I said, I think it's okay. Just go back to bed. It's something I ate, whatever it was, go back to bed. So she went back upstairs, and I'm sitting in the couch there, a little nervous now. What was this all about? And I have a good friend of mine that I go to church with who's a medical doctor, actually in charge of emergency medicine at the University of Arizona. And he and I have developed a great friendship. And so I finally said, you know, I think I'm going to call Dan. And now, you know, if you've ever had a doctor, a plumber, an electrician, a mechanic, anybody in the church, people are always asking for free advice. It just comes with the territory, right? So you get used to that and what that looks like. And so I called Dan. Now, it's about 10:30 or 11 o'clock at night now. And so I called him up, and I said, now, Dan, I'm not going to apologize. I need some free medical advice. I said, let me tell you what happened, and what do you think I should do? He listened to me for a little bit, and then he said to me, what? Are you stupid? I told you we're really good friends, so, you know. He said, you need to go to the emergency room. Better safe than sorry, right? So I went back upstairs. I woke my wife up again, not with quite the same attitude. I said, listen, I just talked to Dan. Dan thinks we need to go to the emergency room. So she got up again, got dressed, and by the time she came down, the pain had come back with increased severity. I was having a difficult time breathing. I was having a heart attack. So we get to the hospital, and we go through all the stuff that they do there and, you know, try to figure out all that's going on. And, you know, it's probably about 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning. The cardiologist came into the room and said, listen, typically we do an angiogram to find out what's happening, but we already know you flunked. So we know there's a problem, and so we're going to go ahead and try to fix it. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to try to open it up with a stent, and if we can't do that, then we'll open heart surgery. You sign all the permissions and all the paperwork, and probably about 9:30 or 10 o'clock, I was wheeled down to the cath lab, and they started that whole procedure. And now they went up through my wrist, which I didn't even know they did at that point, because you know, I'd been a pastor in hospitals a lot. It was always through the groin. You always had to lay still, and that's what took the longest, right? But up through my wrist, and they got into the heart. They found out that there was an artery, the LAD, if you're familiar with, typically called the widowmaker, was 95% clogged, And they were able to open it up with a stent. All was good. Next afternoon, I'm home. I thought heart attacks are not a big deal. Right? I never felt bad before. I didn't feel bad. It's just no big deal. But then you have to go to the follow-up, right, the next week to see the cardiologist. So I walk in the cardiologist's office, and he gets all the test results out, and he starts looking. He said, listen, you've got some problems. First of all, your cholesterol's too high. It was 220. We got to get that down. You're overweight, so we got to get your weight down. And you have a family history of heart problems, and that puts you at severe risk. So you need to exercise more and take care of yourself. He got done, and I said, now, Doc, how many times have you given that speech? He said, well, hundreds of times. And I said, how many people actually changed their life because you gave them a speech? He said about 30%. 70% of heart patients just continue to live the life they've always lived, knowing they're going to have another event. I said, Doc, you do the exact same thing I do. Night after night after night, I'm in front of people trying to help them become as healthy as they can be and to move into be as effective as they can be at building the kingdom. And people sit there and they nod their heads and change nothing. I said, this is exactly what I do. He said, now you got to do some things. You got to eat better, you got to exercise more, and you got to get that cholesterol level down. I said, okay, I will. I left out of there determined. I was going to be one of the 30%. So I started having single cheeseburgers instead of double cheeseburgers. I started having small fries instead of large fries. I started walking up the stairs instead of taking the elevator. I'm eating better, I'm exercising more, certainly that's going to help. Right? So I'm doing everything he told me to do. And then I went back for the checkup a couple of months later. They go through all the blood work again, and you sit there in the room, and they say, he came in and he said, now listen, you got to take this seriously. He said, your cholesterol is still too high. You've actually put on a pound. You got to take this seriously. I said, I did. Your program stinks. You said if I ate better and exercised more, I'd get healthy. See, that's what happens often when we work with churches. We'll talk about what you need to do to get healthy, and when you don't do exactly what you need to do and pay the price and do the energy, you'll blame the program. Yeah, we did tips. That didn't work. Because no, nothing changes just because you have a desire to change it. It has to actually in us to make the necessary changes that can sometimes be very hard. This was October. We went through the follow. On February 9th, I'll never forget it. I was coming home from a meeting. It was Saturday night. And I'm gone on home, and I pulled into my house, and I have two adult daughters, and both of their... I thought, this is weird. It's like 9:30 at night. My wife's in bed at 8:30, man. She grew up on the farm. So, that whole idea of, what are they doing here? So I go in, and they're having an intervention. Now, that's not what they were doing. They said, Dad, listen, you need to take this seriously. You tell churches all the time, just a wish to change will not change anything. You actually have to have a plan to change. So we're not leaving until you come up with a plan. I said, man, that's what I want to do with churches. Right now, we're not leaving until you come up with a plan to get healthy, right, in the middle of that. And so they got serious about it, and I said, okay, I will. I said, no, Dad, we're not leaving until you have a plan. You tell churches all the time, you need goals, and you need to figure out how to accomplish those goals to accomplish what God's called you to do. You got to come up with a plan. So we started talking about it a little bit. My youngest daughter was a runner and a swimmer in high school. She said, Dad, here's what I want you to do. Next January, I want you to run a marathon with me. I said, how far is that? She said, 26.2. I said, you're nuts. Somebody run that far on purpose? It doesn't sound like fun to me at all. Now, I knew nothing about running, but it was obvious they weren't going home, and I said, okay, I will. I had no idea what I said. I will too. I just wanted them to go. So I said, okay, I will. So I called a friend of mine who's a runner, and I said, Kevin, I need you to coach me on preparing for a marathon. He said, okay, I'll be glad to. He said, here's what you need to be able to do. You need to be able to run 30 minutes without stopping. Now, I don't know if you know how long 30 minutes running is. That's a long time. It's like an eternity when you don't do it, right? Because I take very seriously the proverb that says, foolish is the man that runs when no one's chasing him. That's a reason not to right there, right? But I started at it. He says, need 30 minutes. So I worked at it. I think it was probably the end of May, the 1st of June. I finally got up to the 30 minutes without stopping. I called Kevin. I said, I'm ready. He said, you're ready for what? I said, I'm ready to run the marathon. He said, no, you misunderstood. You're now ready to start training. See, there's churches that think just because they go through a TIPS process and have an intentional interim to get healthy, that when that TIPS leaves, they're done. That's just the beginning of the process to get as healthy as you possibly can be. So then he sends me a spreadsheet. Now, I don't know if you've ever prepared for a marathon or not, but it was crazy. I had to do stuff every day. I had short runs, long runs, form runs, core development, all kinds of things that I had to do every day. I thought, this is crazy. Whose idea was this? But I started at it. Now, you all know, when you do a short run of a mile or 2 or 3, no big deal. When you start getting to that 6, 7, 8 mile mark, man, you got to get up earlier and earlier because I was not fast. My whole goal was to run without dying, man, not be fast, so it takes forever. So I'm going to tell you, it was easy when the alarm clock went off at 5:30 to get up and run. It was a whole lot harder when it went off at 3:30 to get up to do a long run. I'm going to tell you, it's just like you all are going to face as you walk through becoming healthier. There'll be times you'll want to slam that alarm clock against the wall. It's too hard. It's different. I've never done this before. We've never done it that way before. It's a lot of work. But I'm going to tell you, health and being on mission with Jesus makes this journey worth it so that we can get to a place of increased health. So I stayed at it. I was working hard all summer and into the fall, and I got a telephone call from my daughter in October, and she said, Dad, I can't run with you in January. I said, what do you mean you can't run? She goes, we're pregnant. Now, we're grateful for her being pregnant, and we, rejoiced in that. But inside of me, I'm going, thank you, Jesus. I thought I was off the hook. I thought I was done with that whole thing. But she said, Dad, I want you to run. So I stayed at it, and I don't know if you've ever run a marathon or not, but you have to actually pay them for your pain. It costs you. You actually sign up, and it's not cheap to pay them for the pain. Now I get ready to sign up, and there's a couple questions they asked that I didn't even know they were going to ask me. The first one was, what is your pace? Slow was not an option. You've ever run a marathon, you know what they do? They put you in these little pens based on your speed so you don't slow the faster runners up. So I picked the last one because my goal was to finish without dying and to finish before they closed the finish line. That was it. So slow was not an option, but I picked the longest one I could and what that looked like. And then the second question they ask is, do you want to run the full marathon or the half marathon? But I didn't even know that was an option. My daughter's not going to be there. Who cares? And I was already up at that point to 9.5 to 10 miles. So I said, I know I could do 13 without dying. So I signed up for the half marathon. I chickened out. Now, since then, I've run 7 half marathons and 3 full marathons. I still hate running. People talk about the runner's high. That's a figment of somebody's imagination. It's not there in doing that. Now, unless you're a runner, then you're going, oh, yeah, I've been there. Not me. It's still a struggle every time I do it. Now, for the last 2 years, I haven't been able to run. I accident doing some construction stuff and got chemical burns on my legs, and so I was out of commission for several months of being able to run. I've just now started walking in January. I'll start running again in March. Not because I like running, it's just because I like being healthy. I want to be as healthy as I can be. And I just want to say to you tonight, we're going to talk about a lot of different things that may seem a little hard to receive or painful to receive. But our whole purpose is not to make you feel bad. Our whole purpose is to help us understand how to be healthy. What would it look like to be on fire for Jesus in new, fresh ways, reaching a culture that's changing quickly around us? What does that look like for us? You see, I started this whole thing by saying God is not surprised, nor is he caught off guard by what's happening around you. He's right in the middle of it. He's counting on you and he's counting on me to be his hands and his feet to a lost and broken world. The pain of the journey will be worth it when you experience the blessing of seeing his kingdom expand because of the ministry of your church. So tonight, what I get a chance to do is share your report. These are your results. I want you to imagine you've gone through all the tests. You know, you've got the cholesterol level checked, you've got the CAT scans, and you've got all of the stuff that you've done. You're coming back to the doctor to hear the report. But it's your report. You may not like the report, but it does no good to blame the doctor. So I just want to tell you right at the very beginning, I am the messenger. All right, just so you know, there may be some things here that are a little uncomfortable, but it's your report. It's what you all have said. It's the condition that we just need to acknowledge so that we can begin to get healthier. Now, you didn't know me back then, but my cholesterol now, I just did my cardiology workup in January. My cholesterol now is 112. Whew. I'm going to tell you what, that's really good. I'm 40 pounds lighter than I was then. I still got another 20 to go. But hey, it's just life, right? But it's that idea of feeling better, having more energy, being able to live life in a healthier kind of way. What would happen if every church in America made a commitment to being as healthy as they could be, to reach as many people, and to be on mission with Jesus? It would transform our country. We literally have thousands and thousands and thousands of churches that dot the landscape of America. Millions and millions and millions of people who get up every Sunday and go to church. What would happen if we just made a commitment to be as healthy as we could be so that we could be on mission with Jesus to reach as many people as we could? I'm telling you, it would change the world. Well, that's a pretty lofty goal, change the world. How about if we just work on changing us? Just because that's where it always begins. It always begins with you and me. So tonight I want to share with you a little bit of what we discovered in this process. Some of you had a chance to be with the farmers who were there to do some interviews, and Darla, who's here for the weekend, and began to collect the information. We collect a lot of writing stuff, a lot of face-to-face stuff, a lot of data that we begin to do. And so we want to just kind of summarize all of that tonight. We're going to do it in a couple of different ways. The first thing we're going to talk about is church health, the overall health of the church. And we'll kind of dive in there. We'll spend a little more time there than the other sections, but we'll talk about church health. Then we'll talk about the life cycle, where the church is at on the life cycle from beginning to end. It's not chronological, it's attitudinal, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk also about statistics a little bit. Statistics in COVID have been challenging at best, right, to try to figure them all out. But we'll talk a little bit about them to identify trends. Then we'll take a look at all those surveys that you filled out, the face-to-face interviews. We summarized all of those and we put them all together so that you can see those. Then we'll talk a little bit about first impressions. That's from the perspective of people that were here, the farmers and Darla, who was here for the Sunday. Just some of their observations. Talk about the summary of conclusions, kind of how it all summarizes together. And then we'll talk about recommendations. Now, here's what you need to remember. You don't need to digest everything I'm going to talk about tonight. All right? Tomorrow, if the church has your email address, and if you use email, you're going to get a copy of this entire report in a PDF format so that you can digest it. Tonight is a presentation. Then we want you to digest it, and then Wes will lead you in conversation about the report. So it's a kind of a three-step process. What we learned is if we just give the report, people don't pay attention to the reason. They just look at the conclusions and decide if they want to agree with them or not. So we want you to hear the data so that the conclusions make sense, so that the recommendations can be transformational. So it's presentation, digestion, you get a chance. Now, if you don't know what a PDF is, let the church office know, and they will make a printed copy for you today. All right? We do it in a PDF so you can look at it on your phone, your tablet. It's 70 pages long, so it's a little lengthy, but really it's 37 pages that you want to pay attention to, and the supporting documentation that goes along with it. All right? So don't get overwhelmed by that. It's that 35 pages or 36 pages that you'll want to pay attention to. So I want you to be able to read that. But the office will prepare a printed copy for you if you'd prefer that. You just need to let the office know. So if you want to give the office a call or let somebody know that you'd like a printed copy, they'll have those ready next Sunday for you. to do. So you don't have to remember everything I'm going to say, because you won't. But I want you to hear the heart of the report so that the data of the report makes sense in doing that. So the first thing we're going to talk about is church health. Now, some of you, this is a concept that you've thought about or you've been exposed to in different kinds of ways. But what we did is to try to figure out, can we measure health of the church beyond just statistics, just beyond numbers? Because that's the way we've done it. I mean, I've grown up in the Church of the Nazarene, and I was a part of the church growth movement. You know, the whole idea, a church was successful if it grew. You know, if there were more people this year than last year, it was successful. So what that did is created a climate where pastors would not intentionally be dishonest, but they would fudge the numbers. Because that's what was judged as success or failure, was how many people, what were the finances, all of those kind of pieces were a part of that. And I was guilty as all get out in trying to figure out how to get more people to show up on Sunday, instead of, are we creating devoted followers of Jesus? You see, the reality was, Jesus wanted us to make disciples, not just more spectators. And across the United States, there are a lot of folk that show up every Sunday that are spectators to the show, but are not a part of the mission, not engaged in where Jesus is at. And so how do you create a climate? How do you measure whether a church's foundation will produce disciples? And so about 30 years ago now, I was introduced to an organization called Natural Church Development. It's an organization out of Germany, and Christian Schwartz, who was the founder, was a recovering church growth addict like I was. I mean, I've done the stupidest things as a pastor. I've preached from the roof. I rode a horse to church. I've had a tie cut off. I had pies in the face, just to get people to show up. You know, people show up and say, what's that crazy guy going to do next? Right? The problem is when you create that kind of a climate, it becomes a show that people attend, not a place to be transformed. So how do you measure that? Can you do that? I'm on a campaign. I'm gaining no traction, but I'm on a campaign to change the scorecard in the church. See, we are impressed with the wrong stuff. Jesus taught us that he was never impressed by numbers. Do you remember when Jesus fed the 5,000? Remember that story? Yeah? Kind of? Oh, good. Whew. Okay, well, Jesus had this big crowd, 5,000 men, plus women and children that were in the room, and he began to feed them. A miracle happened. People got excited. And it said a lot of people started following Jesus all over the place. Man, they thought, this is great. I want to be a part of that thing. That was a great show. Let's follow him again. Maybe he'll do another one. So they started following him. Well, one day, the Bible tells us, Jesus turned around and looked at this crowd that had started gathering around him. And he said, do you know what's going to cost you to follow me? It's going to cost you everything. I have to be the most important thing in your life. I can't be second or third. I got to be first. More important than your family, more important than death, more important than life. I have got to be number one. And the Bible says not many followed Jesus after that day. I mean, you think about it. Jesus had this group of 5,000 that by the time he had into heaven, he had grown it to 120. I mean, he's not getting invited to a church growth conference, I'm telling you right now. But see, he's never impressed by numbers. He wanted to look at the heart of people and say, what really matters, are we creating disciples, followers of Jesus, who are on mission with Jesus? So how do you measure that? Well, I got introduced to Christian Schwartz, and he had the same kind of issues. And so they did a research project to say, a way to measure some of the stuff beyond numbers. So they developed a profile, a survey, that helps measure characteristics of a healthy church. So they took a look at churches that were actually creating disciples, and so what are the characteristics? And out of those, they identified 8 characteristics that are essential. Things that every church has to have in some way, different expressions of it, but it has to have these 8 characteristics. And then began to give us scoring. And so we did that survey. Here's the assessment process, and here are your results for your church. Now, a couple things you have to keep in mind is that even though the scale on the slide is 0 to 100, it's not really 0 to 100. So this is not a standardized test that's talking about percentages like school. This is a survey that measures your church's deviation from the mean. Now, every year they take all the statistics, all the numbers, they put them all together, and they keep the mean at 50. Right? So the mean is always 50, which means you have a number less than 0, and you can have a number greater than 100, even though the scale is 0 to 100. They always keep the mean at 50 to see how a church adjusts to that mean. So these are your scores compared to the mean line at 50. Now, there are two numbers you have to keep in mind to understand the results. The first is 65. 65 is considered the healthy line. So any characteristic 65 or higher is considered healthy. Our goal is to get all 8 65 or higher, because when that happens, healthy churches will produce disciples. And now there have been over 87,000 of these surveys done around the world. Over 37,000 in the United States alone. That's a miracle of God, right? That 37,000 churches in America would agree on anything. You know, we're convinced if it works here, it won't work here, right? Wherever here or there it is. But what we discovered from all these churches, 98% of the time when the scores are 65 or higher, the church is growing, with the premise being healthy churches will grow, because that's what healthy churches will do. The focus is not growth, the focus is health, because all growing churches are healthy. So the idea is to measure how healthy we are, so 65 becomes our goal. Now, the other number you have to keep in mind is 35. 35 is considered the unhealthy line. Characteristics that are 35 or below are going to require significant work and change. Now, I'm going to introduce you to a concept tonight. It's going to mess some of you up. Change is not a swear word. All right, just so we know, because sometimes we think it is. Not you all, people that aren't here tonight. That sometimes we're fearful of change. We're afraid of it's not what we've always done. It's not what we're used to. But the reality is God is always making things new. Always recreating. And so what we want to do is pay attention. Notice already, you've already drawn the conclusions, that you have several characteristics that are below the 35 mark and a couple that are just above the 35 mark, which would indicate the areas of concern and priorities that affect and impact the recommendations. So you'll see here, and I'm going to break these down so that you understand what we mean by the language, but the survey measures the adjective of the descriptor. So, for instance, it measures how empowered leaders are, not whether you have leaders. Now, some people look at that score and say, oh, we need more leaders. That's not what that means. It means how empowered are your existing leaders. We talk about gift-based ministry. We have ministry going on, but how gift-based is it? So the adjective becomes the very thing the survey measures, and our strategies or the goals have to attach and attack the adjective. So how do we help leaders become more empowered? How do we help ministry become more gift-based? How do we help spirituality become more passionate? How do we make sure our structures are effective, that the service is inspiring, that the small groups are holistic, that evangelism is need-oriented, and relationships are loving? All right, so the adjective is what gets measured, and also our strategy has to take a look at how to improve that adjective. Now, for some of us, this is brand new language. You're going, I don't even know what all that means. How does that all break down? Well, what the survey also does is take each one of these characteristics and breaks them into 4 subcategories to help you understand what we mean. Same scoring, 35, 50, 65, in each of the subcategories. And so starting with your lowest, which is gift-based ministry, here are the subcategories to help you understand what we mean by that. So we're talking about integrating gifts into ministry. In other words, is what I'm doing within the body life of the church based on how God put me together? Is it based on my gifts, my call, my passion? And is what I'm doing, do I feel like it's significant to the body life of the church, or is it just a job that I'm fulfilling? And am I supported and am I equipped in what I'm being asked to do? So here's our goal in all of that, is to make sure every person in the congregation is engaged in the body life of the church by doing what they're gifted, called, and passionate about. Nothing more, nothing less. So if you're doing something currently you're not gifted to do, you're not called to do, you're not passionate about, you need to stop. Now, I said that one night, and the lady back, she raised her hand and said, "Are you serious?" She goes, "I quit." She goes, "I've been the missionary president around this church for the last 2 years. I hate it." I said, "I think it's a good idea. I think you got to quit." I'm going home tonight. What that looks like. In doing that, I said to the pastor after, I said, "I am so sorry. I didn't mean for that to happen tonight." He goes, "No, thank you." She's the worst missionary president I've ever had in my entire ministry, man. Thank you. See, the problem is, it's not a personal problem. It's a process problem that encourages people to serve outside of their gifts, calls, and passion. Now, the other side of that is, if you have folk in the church that aren't currently involved in the ministry life of the church, there should be no unemployed Christians going to a Christian church. We all have a responsibility. We are the body. We are the hands and the feet of Jesus. We have a responsibility to the body life of the church that if we're not doing and we're not engaged, then we are not on mission with Jesus. That'll mess you up. If you say, "Well, I'm too old, I'm too young, I'm too whatever." All throughout Scripture, Jesus addresses the fact that age has nothing to do with our ability to contribute to the body life of the church. Every one of us has a place to serve. Now, certainly, life situations impact what you can do at different seasons, but we all ought to be engaged at the place of call, passion, and giftedness. So if you're currently attending here and you're not involved in the ministry life of the church, I'm going to ask you to step up. Step in. Make yourself available to what the Holy Spirit would like to direct and guide you to be engaged with. Every part doing its part encourages and enables the body to be healthy. If you want a healthy church, you've got to have engaged people instead of burned out people doing things they wish they didn't have to do, because nobody else will in that process. So that's what we're talking about in gift-based ministry. Now, that's your lowest factor. We'll spend a little more time there. You'll see the recommendations. Also spend some time there talking about how do we engage people in the ministry life of the church. How do we make sure we celebrate people? How do we make sure we support them and equip them to do what we're asking them to do? We've been famous for getting volunteers to do stuff and never giving them the responsibility or the tools or the training to do it well. And then we complain about it. Yeah, but nobody told me how to do that. I just like you, so I said yes. You know, it's out of relationship or out of guilt. They get people to do stuff. Anyway, gift-based ministry. The second one, which is, again, below 35, so it becomes a priority, is effective structures. Now, I'll just tell you right up front, effective structures are probably the least spiritual of all 8 characteristics, right? It's the nuts and bolts stuff. It's how we do things, what that looks like, how well do we plan? Do we have structures and systems in place to train, equip, release people, and engage the culture around us? Now, you'll notice that score is 0, which would mean there's a lot of room for improvement. Potential is unlimited of what that begins to look like and how to be effective. Then we talk about innovation and managing change. When that score is low, it tells us or indicates to us that there may be some in the church that are resistant to change. Not you all, other people that aren't here tonight, right? That may be just a little resistant to anything being done differently. So that's the innovation and managing change. The one thing I've learned about God is God's a God of new creation. Every morning, his mercies are new. Every opportunity that we have every day puts us in a place to be used by him in some new and exciting ways. It's that whole idea of innovation and managing change. And then we talk about structures for effective leadership. In other words, do we have a process in place to identify, train, and release new leaders? There are a lot of churches that are a leadership crisis or a death away from a leadership crisis. 4 or 5 deaths, and man, that church is in leadership crisis because we've not been intentional about raising up the next generation. I don't mean age generation, the next generation of leaders of those that aren't currently serving. How do we do that? What does that look like to have mentor relationships with leaders and potential leaders? How do we train them? How do we create a climate where we can begin to identify future leaders in the church? That becomes critical, again, because this score is 23. It's one of those that we have to pay attention to move the church towards increased health. Now, the third one that we talk about, again, below the health line, is inspiring worship. Now, there are 4 sections to inspiring worship. Personal transformation is application. In other words, because I show up on Sunday, is my life different on Monday? Does it impact what I do? Or do I simply go through the motions of attending church every Sunday and not thinking of how it should impact me on Monday? That's what we talk about in personal transformation. It's the application of what we're trying to get people to do. Now, that's not just preaching, that's music, that's everything combined. Is it a transformational experience? Is it something that we build this great anticipation for to do that? And are we visitor or guest friendly? Now, that doesn't mean a worship style. Don't mess that up. When we talk about visitor friendly and guest friendly, is it easy for guests to attend without roadblocks so that the Holy Spirit can actually speak into their hearts and their lives? Because you know how it is. From the moment a person pulls into your property, they begin to develop opinions and impressions that are either going to help them worship or it's going to hinder their worship. And when a guest shows up, one of the things they want to know is, what door do I go in? Where are the bathrooms? Nobody wants to ask where bathrooms are, right? They want to be able to figure those out. Where's the children's ministry? Where's it located? Do I have to go searching for it? Is it obvious? If I show up in the week, do I know where the offices are at? It's what we talk about being guest friendly. It's creating a climate where we're prepared for company. And we actually expect them to show up. Our language that we use up front, the climate and the atmosphere that happens within a congregation. Are we welcoming? Are we engaging with guests? That's all about being guest friendly, creating that climate. And then we talk about relevance of message. Now, when we do an interim, we never spend a lot of time on this one because quite honestly, we don't know who you're referring to when you're trying to talk about preaching. Was it this supply person, or was it this supply person, or was it the previous pastor? The reality is, during transition times and interim times, the relevance of message becomes a mute score. It really doesn't mean anything. We don't impact it at all in our recommendations. But creating a place that is transformational, where there's high anticipation for it, and where is guest friendly, we do have to pay attention to, because that will allow for inspiration. Now, you can't force somebody to be inspired, right? But you can create a climate where people can be inspired. And that's what we're talking about, is creating a climate that's welcoming, a climate where the Holy Spirit can really speak and work into people's lives. And then the next one, again, 4 below 35, the fourth one is empowering leadership. Now, empowering leadership means, how well do leaders empower other people? One of the mistakes that we make in the church so often is that we think everything that happens has to be approved by somebody else. See, empowering people means we trust people to do it even if it's done differently than we would. Anybody hold the old adage, if you want a job done right? That is a death sentence in the church. And when you think about it, it's pretty prideful to think you're the only one that can do that. I've discovered no matter what I do, there's always somebody else that can do it better. And wise is the leaders that can find people to do it better and release them. Yeah, when I was a pastor and working with our staff, the staff would come and ask me something. I'd say, man, it's your job. Figure it out. I trust you. That's why we hired you. That's why we brought you on the team. We have a lot of confidence in what we've asked you to do. Just go ahead and do it. Now, that happens with volunteer leaders in the church all the time. So say I'm in charge of Sunday school, or whatever the whatever our new term is this year. Family life, Christian education, Sunday school, we keep changing it. I've been in the church a long time, man. I never know what it's called. The education, family life, small group, whatever you want to call it thing. Let's say you've asked me to be in charge of that. Well, you decide, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what we need to do. We get a team together, And there's actually some churches that have to approve team members that I recruit for my team. How crazy is that? Either you trust me or you don't trust me. If you don't trust me, then don't give me the job. Because I know what we need for this particular job. That's what you're asking me to do. It's the idea of empowering. You say, well, somebody's got to give oversight to that whole thing. Well, the reality is that's why you have a team of people in specific areas. You know, I was a youth pastor for a lot of years. And I'm going to tell you right now, if a youth pastor came to me and said, what should I do? I'm going to say, I don't know. It's a different world than when I was a youth pastor. Don't ask me. That's why we hired you. I used to say to my staff all the time, listen, if you always agree with me, one of us isn't needed. I already know what I think, and I'm pretty sure I'm right. What I need to do is hear what you have to say. It's empowering. It's creating trust in people. And sometimes that's really hard when we try to micromanage everything. What we need to do is set boundaries by our core values and our vision and what we're trying to accomplish, but let people live within those. Whatever those are, to begin to say we need to empower people more effectively. Because here's what happens. If you don't empower people, the first people to leave your church are the creative people. If creative people aren't permitted to be creative, they will not stay. They're going to find a place where their creativity can be expressed. So it's creating a climate where we empower people to do that. And we talk about leadership fit. That's making sure leaders are in the right places, doing the right things. Not just because I've always done this job, but make sure it's a right fit for my life situation, for God's call, my passion, my gifts. Am I in the right place? And then delegation of ministry means we're going to give away responsibility for ministry and not just get somebody to do a job. Have you ever had anybody ask you to do something and you do it and then they change it? They do it different? And there's nothing more frustrating than that. I was with a church in Texas one time, and we were talking about gift-based ministry, and we're talking about empowering leadership and delegating and giving responsibility. And we spent a whole day coming up with strategies and some of the things the church could do to more effectively release ministry. And we get done, it's about 3:30 in the afternoon. We're finishing up, and we're having a little pie social that night with the church to talk about some of the goals and some of the things we're going to do. And pastor's going to take me back to the motel, and we're getting ready to leave. He says, just fellowship hall. So we Paul, and he starts rearranging all the tables and chairs that were set up. I thought to myself, wait a minute, did you set all these up first? So I asked, who set all these up? He said, oh, we had a couple ladies come in to do it this afternoon. I said, well, will they be here tonight? Oh yeah, they come to everything. So what are they going to think when they come in and all the chairs and tables are rearranged? And more importantly, what are they going to say the next time you ask? Do it yourself. You're going to change it anyway. See, empowering leadership and giving away responsibility. Now, it'll work both ways. That's not the question. It would be a way. But the idea is to trust people and to delegate ministry responsibility, not just task, and what that begins to look like. And then we talk about a vision that's guiding direction. That's the parameters. That's the thing that holds us steady. Those are our guardrails to do that. Yeah, that's our mistake. We didn't clear that off. The template that we used, the church had a -6 on that score. It's just to get moved off in doing that. So thankfully, that's not here. That was a church where they controlled everything. A little small group of people had to approve everything, every decision. But anyway, irregardless. So it's the idea of having guardrails, which becomes the vision to be able to do that. Now, we move beyond the 35 mark. Now, obviously, during the transition period, we can't address everything that needs to be addressed. So we're going to work on those 4 that are the lowest. It will have impact on the others, and some of the things we're going to do will impact them, but not as directly. So, for instance, need-oriented evangelism deals with the whole idea of knowing the needs of the community, adjusting our priorities to meet those needs so that the gospel becomes good news. So we talk about being a compassionate church. Now, people get a little nervous here when they see that. We're not talking about whether a church cares for people. Compassionate church means I know the needs of the community, and I'm willing to adjust our ministry priorities to meet those needs. That's compassion. I see a need, and I'm willing to adjust to meet the need. That's not a new concept for church health. That's a biblical concept from 1 John. If you see a brother or sister in need and have no pity on them, how can you say that the love of God is in you? Right? It's that idea of seeing a need and adjusting our priorities to meet that need if we have the resources or ability to be able to do that. So that's what we're talking about in compassion. Then we talk about being corporate evangelistic strategies. In other words, is what we're doing actually resulting in people getting saved? Is it making a difference in people's lives? Then we talk about personal evangelism. That doesn't mean everybody in the church is seeing people come to Christ. It's a desire. Here's where we get excited. So there are some, because we start with the lowest, it seems always a little depressing after you go through the 3 or 4 of them, right? But then we start looking at some of the positive things to ask ourselves, what's the potential? One of those positives came from the idea that the vast majority of people have a desire to see lost and broken people come to know Jesus. That's good news. Because if we have the heart, we can figure out the processes. We can figure out the how. But if we don't have the heart, then we have to change the heart before we get to the processes. So that's good news, that there is a heart to reach lost and broken people. But our current structure and what we're currently doing is not resulting in that. Then we talk about being seeker-sensitive. Now, seeker-sensitive is different than guest-friendly. Guest-friendly creates the climate. Seeker-sensitive means we have space and place for people to explore their faith before they ever believe. See, I grew up in an era where we had confrontational evangelism, right? Hey, if you died tonight, would you go to heaven? If you stood before Jesus and he said, why should I let you in, what would you say? Right? Evangelism explosion, or Nazarenes in actions, we Nazarenes called it, because we Nazarenize everything. It wasn't our plan, it was Kennedy's plan. But we had to make it Nazarenes in action, right? And what that looked like. So we trained people how to do it. First person I ever led to Jesus, I was 18 years old. I'd been a Christian for 6 months. I knocked on this lady's door at 7:30 on a Thursday night with 2 other guys standing on her trailer door. She came to the door, and we said, hey, if you died tonight, would you go to heaven? Now, I'm going to tell you, I wouldn't do that today. I'd show up on some single lady's door at 7:30 at night and knock on the door. She's going to say, you're ready to meet heaven. You better be ready. You know, it's just a different culture that we live in. But confrontational evangelism, whether it's a Romans road, the 4 spiritual laws, whatever plan we were trained in, equipped in, it was confrontational. It worked. People believed, and then they belonged. Now, in today's culture, people will belong before they believe. It's a relationship that we have to establish. That means in the church, we have to create space for people that don't act like us, smell like us, or talk like us. Because they don't believe the same things yet. They're trying to figure out, is this real? So they come and they participate without coming to faith yet. We have to create space for that because it takes a lot longer. Evangelism is a whole lot different today than it was 30 or 40 years ago. Now it's a process that people have to go through to see whether it's real or not. What you know is not nearly as important as what they see in your life. In other words, they're looking at you and saying, okay, you say you're a Jesus follower. What difference does that make in everything you do? What difference does it make in your relationship with your spouse? What difference does it make in your relationship at work? What difference does it make with your relationship with your kids? What difference does it make in your relationship to the community? Is it real? And when they see it as real, they're more likely to come to a place of faith. So that's being seeker-sensitive. It's sensitive to those that are seeking, yet not yet believers in doing that. Then the numbers continue above the 35 holistic small groups. Again, during the interim time, we don't have a lot of work on that. We do make a couple of suggestions just to begin to create a climate. We get it. COVID has impacted this area of the church probably more than any other. The whole idea of small groups and getting together and connecting and relationships and all of those kind of things, people have tried to do all kinds of things to make it work, but it's been one of those areas that's been a really challenge. Some for the people that are in the church, they found ways to do it, but for new people, trying to engage in a small group or engage in a Bible, it's been really hard. A guest shows up, and how do they do that? You know, for all of you that know each other, you can figure out how to do it. You can get together for a Bible study, you can get together for a Sunday school class, but for a guest, they're figuring out, how do I navigate this? It's different than it's ever been before. So it's been a bit of a challenge for all of us. Then we talk about love and relationships. Now, again, that's more than just being a friendly church, because every church we work with sees itself as the most friendly church in town. I've yet to have a church say, we're pretty unfriendly around here. We don't like people. Every church believes itself to be friendly. And the reason we say we're friendly is because everybody tells us we're friendly that stay. But what about the people that didn't stay? Well, they're going to the friendly church down the road. Because every church in America thinks itself to be friendly. So we're not talking about that. We're talking about relationships that go deeper than the weather or the sports teams. We're talking about relationships that go deeper so that we can really care about one another, so that we really involve and engage, so people are affirmed. There's an atmosphere of joy and acceptance. One of the things that has been robbed and taken from the church that should have never happened is our ability to be people of hope. And we are people of hope. But man, I go into a lot of churches in the last 2 years that are discouraged and depressed and mad and mean and saying cruel things and all kinds of things that are going on. That's not people of hope. That's people of discouragement. Man, we've got reason to hope. This is not the final answer. Y'all know that, right? This is just a season. Just like there have been seasons of life all throughout our lives. It's a season that we're working our way through. But we are people of hope in the middle of whatever the season is that God takes us through. I mean, I challenge you to get into the Old Testament and read some of the Old Testament. Man, the Israelites went through all kinds of seasons. This year in my Bible reading, I'm in the Minor Prophets, and so I've started with Hosea. I don't know if you've read Hosea lately, but go ahead. And you want to be discouraged? I mean, God says, I'm done. They are no longer my people. I am no longer their God. It was a season that was pretty dry for Israel. But by the time you get to the end of the book, things begin to change. Y'all know we're in the beginning, not the end. God still has an ending to write. And for churches that can be messengers of hope, we have a light. If we don't let it get so dim by our own discouragement, and our own blame, and our own finger pointing, and our own stuff. And I can't believe all the stuff that's been going on with people demanding their own way and getting mad and getting angry and leaving the church and quitting this or quitting that. And man, get a grip. This is a season of ministry. It's a season of life, and we are people of hope. We're going to get through this. In many places, we've already got it. I'm in Arizona. I'm going to tell you, we've already moved on. It's not a part of our conversation anymore. We're discovering what's next for the church and for God's kingdom. It's coming. It's coming. Be people of hope in the middle of what's coming. Whatever that is, what's next, we don't know, but it's going to be fun. When was the last time you heard that? It's going to be exciting. It is going to be fun. It is. We're people of hope. Because God's in the middle of all that's going on in our lives and what that looks like. So we talk about the idea of deepening relationships. We talk about how conflict is resolved. Some of the reality, and you all know this, not anything I'm going to say different, but you all know there's been some recent conflict that hasn't been resolved in transformational kind of ways. It's been resolved with divorce, and it's been resolved with people leaving and stepping away and getting mad and all those. We just haven't dealt with it real well in our interpersonal relationships. And so we got to pay attention to that, because that's the heart of love and relationships. Conflict is not the issue. There's always going to be conflict. I mean, if we always agree with one another, it's not much of a relationship, but we got to create climate so that we can have great conversation and sometimes even disagree with each other strongly and still stay together. All of you that are married, chances are you've had some strong conversations with your spouse. Now, I know some of you are going, yeah, not me. I've never had a fight in my life. And I've done a lot of counseling as a pastor, and when everybody came to my office and said that, I always prayed, God, give me a memory like that. Because not truth, it's memory, but it's that reality. That's how you grow closer together, right? That's how you learn. It's not fun when you're in the middle of it, but the end result allows us to be healthier. It's the same thing in the church. It allows us to be healthier. clearly define who we are and why we're existing. So that whole idea of loving relationships is critical. Then we move into the highest one, which is passion and spirituality. We always like it when this one's high because that talks about our own personal relationship with Jesus. Hey, here's the good news. You love each other and you love Jesus. That's good news. I mean, who wants to go to a church where you don't love Jesus and you don't like each other? Nobody does that. I mean, so we love Jesus and we love each other. That's great. We have a heart for lost and broken people. That's exciting. Now it's just a matter of trying to figure out how to take care of the things that are holding us back from reaching our full potential. Because there's incredible potential here. It's not how can we reach that? How do we engage that intentionally in what that looks like? So we take all 32 of those scores and we say, okay, here are the strengths of the church. Here's where the church does its best work. That's in the area of deepening of relationships. Remember, loving each other, caring for each other. Most of you are connected in deep relationships. That's positive. Personal evangelism, a commitment to reaching lost and broken people. A passion for our devotional life and our own seeking Jesus. A spiritual connection with other people and experiencing God in our lives personally. Those are great. Man, how exciting is that? That's a great foundation. Because those are the heart issues, which indicates the hearts are in the right place. Man, I got really excited. Whenever we do these results and I go through this, I'm going, yeah, there's hope here. There's a lot of potential here to realize. But what we have to do is recognize the areas that are holding us back from reaching that potential, right? Because potential can be a devastating thing or a very helpful thing. Because potential unrealized becomes depression. Potential realized can be transformational. So how do we do that? Well, we begin to identify then what are some of those areas we have to pay attention to, structures and systems, empowering leaders, significance of ministry, support for ministry, transformation and worship. That all is about serving. It's all about what we do in our own lives, that idea of systems that help us to get engaged, processes that allow us to do what God's called us to do and gifted us to do, so that we can be all that God has for us, so that we're trained, we're equipped, we're supported, we're released to do ministry. So what we discovered throughout the assessment is that there are some people that are on the sidelines of ministry, not engaged fully in the body life of the church. They become attenders, not missionaries. So we become people that attend, but we're not really engaged in the mission. So part of the challenges that we want to do is how do we increase mission participation? How do we increase engagement? How do we increase people getting involved? And so we're talking about systems to make that happen. We're talking about making sure people are supported, and that they're equipped, that they're trained, that they're released to be able to do what they need to do. So you're going to find all of that impacts our recommendations pretty significantly, especially in the 4 areas that are the low areas below 35. Because increasing health will only happen as we increase each of those characteristics to pay attention. So I told you that's the longest one, spending time in the church health, because we're talking about foundation stuff here. We're talking about what that looks like. Now, the second piece of the overall health of the church that we look at is what we call the life cycle placement of a local congregation. So here's the reality. Every church will have a beginning, and every church will have an ending. No church is designed to last forever. I mean, just think about it. Every church the Apostle Paul started is no longer in existence. That doesn't make Paul an ineffective church planner. Right? Things have a beginning, things have an ending. It's not chronological, it's attitudinal. So it's not a matter of how many years that goes on, it's a matter of the attitude that we have towards where we're at in the life cycle. So for instance, we ask you several questions in the survey portion to say, where is the church in the life cycle? Where do you exist? We rank those on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not us, 5 being us all the time. We ask you to score each of those characteristics, and from that, we got a numerical scoring that looked a little like this. Now, those numbers won't mean a lot at this second, but they will as we unpack those. So you see, in each of the stages of the life cycle, we begin to rank where the church was at. Scale of 1 to 5. 1 being not us, 5 being us all the time. So what we did is take a look at those scores and say, okay, where are the 1s and the 2s? The things that this isn't us. This is not where we are. This is not a part of our life cycle placement. So are you ready for the dumb moment of the night? You ready? This is the duh moment of the night. You ready? You weren't just born and you're not dead. Aren't you glad you came to hear that tonight? You weren't just born and you're not dead. You're somewhere between those two, right? Which is duh, obviously. So then we said, okay, let's take a look at those 2s to 3s, which means some of those characteristics are showing up or have shown up, but they're not the theme. They're not the trending of that. There are 3 areas that applies to, the growth area, the decline area, and the dropout area. Now, the difference between decline and dropout, decline is the numbers are decreasing. Dropout means people are leaving their ministry responsibilities. So we don't have people to do what we're wanting to do. The other is just attendance. It's just people that are less coming in doing that. So then we said, okay, let's take a look at the others, the 3s to 5s, because every church we work with has a tendency to fall within those 3 to 5 in a couple of areas. Very rarely do we have a church that scores one particular area in the life cycle, because the life cycle is a moving document. So you're always moving from one place to the other. So we're trying to determine what's the movement. Where is the church currently in its movement between those 3s and those 5s? Well, you'll discover that maturity and plateau were the 2 that were above the 3 mark, which would indicate to us that the church has moved through the maturity stage and is solidly in the plateau stage. So if we were to chart that on a life cycle, now remember, this is attitudinal. It's not statistical. It's not even church health. Now, if we looked at church health and statistics, we'd say the church is probably closer to decline than it wants to admit. Right now, plateau is the attitude. Plateau is that area of comfort. I like what's going on. I like it. I'm comfortable. All those kind of pieces. Maybe we could do a little more of this or maybe a little more of that, but hey, don't change anything to do it. Right? So you're going to see as we talk about some of the attitudes and some of the things that there is a desire to reach younger families for Jesus in the community. It's a deep desire. The problem is when you're at maturity, we want to do that without changing anything. So what got you here won't get you there. Right? What got you here is great, but what we'll do will require things to be done differently. I told you, change is not a swear word. It's actually just embracing what God wants to do with the church. Now, maturity is a great place to be, but it's also the most dangerous place to be because you get comfortable. We don't see, there's not a sense of urgency to make changes. So what happens is most churches, when they're here, will just continue downward cycle instead of going back to a growth zone because they don't see a need to do it. But here's what we've learned. It is possible to extend the life cycle of the church and to go back into a growth zone, but it will not happen unintentionally. See, it's possible to go from a cholesterol level of 230 and get down to 120. It's possible, but it won't happen just because you want it to happen. It has to be intentional. It's unintentional, same thing here. So how do we get to that place, and what does that begin to look like? So then we say, okay, there's the church health scores, there's the life cycle placement. Then we said, let's take a look at statistics. Now, this whole COVID impact has been significant as far as statistics go, so we don't put a lot of credibility to it because COVID's got blamed for stuff it should have never gotten blamed for. You know, it's just some other things that are going on that we've masked in what that looks like. So what we did is we took a look at attendance. Now, I don't know if you know or not, but the Church of the Nazarene has by far the best research department in the entire world. Better than any other denomination we work with, bar none. Because they have a record of every church around the world and what its attendance, its giving, its membership, its Sunday school, it just measures what the trends are. And that's what we look for, are trends. So this becomes obvious. People always ask, well, where'd those numbers come from? Well, they came from the pastor's report that's turned in to Kansas City every year. So we are not arguing whether those numbers are correct. We're asking, what's the trend? All right, and so you'll discover that basically for 7 years, the church was pretty plateaued. Kind of stayed at what that looked like. You had a little spike in 2018, but then for the last 4 years, there's been a steady decline from that spike, which means we didn't have structures in place to formulate and throw those folk into the body life of the church. It's one thing to have a spike, but you got to have a process to help people get engaged, because people stay because of relationships and engagement. So you got to create a climate where people can get connected to each other and they can have a purposeful way to serve and to be engaged in the ministry life of the church. And that's over and over again. It doesn't matter where the church is at or the size of the church. Relationship and engagement are the two reasons that people will stick it out and go through the stuff. So it's being intentional about how to do that. So then we also said, okay, part of what we have to do is a better indicator for us than a lot of the attendance stuff is the giving. And what has the giving done? Because the giving will have a tendency to indicate the level of support. Jesus had it right. The heart and the wallet are connected. Where your heart is, there your treasure is. Where your treasure is, there your heart is, right? And what that looks like. So we said, okay, let's take a look at this then and say, what has the giving done? Well, from these same 6 years, the church was in a plateau state, just like the attendance. So it was plateaued. Same kind of spike that followed the attendance also went up there. And then for the last several years, it's been a decline in what that looks like, to where now the church is about its lowest that it's been. Now, here's what we've been able to judge. The bounce back from COVID is not so much the attendance as it is the giving. So where giving has balanced or declined, we can almost say the bounce back will also be plateaued or declined. Far better indicator than anything else we do is what is that bounce back expectation once we get through all that and people begin to feel comfortable, they feel comfortable in coming back, all of those kind of pieces. What's the bounce back going to be? This would indicate your bounce back isn't going to be much bigger than what you currently are attending. So, we've got 100 people online. Yeah, but those 100 people come from all over the place. Yeah, I've been at your last 3 church services. I got counted, but I also got counted in 10 other churches because I visit all of our TIPS churches on Sunday. So I start at 7 o'clock in the morning and I work my way down until I get to the West Coast and go to church all over the place. It's great. I love it. I get to stay connected with all of our TIPS pastors and those that are serving around the world. But it's a little hard right now to figure out engagement and what that begins to look like. Indicators are going to be that for the most part, the bounce back for most churches is going to be about 75 to 80% when it's all said and done. In states that are already a little farther ahead, we've seen the bounce back average at about 80%, not much more. We believe the church overall will be about 20% smaller than it was pre-COVID. Just because you had so many people on the edge that have just dropped away and got out of the habit, and others that have found they can engage online without having to attend church and what that looks like. So it's just the reality. Good, bad, doesn't matter. You know, a bunch of people followed Jesus and a bunch of people didn't follow Jesus. So it's not a big deal because God's never impressed with our numbers. It's hard for us because we have to make adjustments then, right? We have to make adjustments to finances. We have to make adjustments to what we can do and how many available workers do we have and all of those kind of things that we have to do. It's a challenge, but it's not a depression. We're people of hope. God is not surprised, nor is he caught off guard. He's just waiting for us to be obedient to whatever he reveals in the middle of that. So that becomes important to do as well. So let me talk a little bit about this lay survey. Some of you know, you filled out the surveys, right? All the written surveys. We had 44 written surveys. We had 34 face-to-face interviews. We had 60 different people that participated in the process. So either written or face-to-face or both, but 60 different people that were a part of that, not counting staff and board. But we had 60 people that were engaged in that process. So what we do is we build a little profile of actually who participated. And you'll discover here that those that participated in the survey, you can see the age breakdown, mostly senior adults. You just look at it. It's mostly those that were 65 and over. All right, I want to do a little experiment. Ready? If you're 65 or older, I want you to hold your hand up. All right? Okay, if you're 65 or younger, under 65, hold your hand up. All right? So you'll see there's a great number of folk that are in that 60, 65 and older crowd, but there are some that are the younger that did not participate in the survey. in what that looks like, and for whatever the reason. We were a little low in our percentages. We like to be at 35 to 40% of the congregation. We hit about 25% here of the adults that were engaged. That number is a little tricky to figure out because your attendance is a little weird because you have 3 different services. No, we only have 2. No, you have 3. You have in-person, online, and Spanish. Right? And those kind of how the breakdowns go as well. Unfortunately, the Spanish congregation did not participate in the survey part of this process. And part of that is our fault. Part of it is because we weren't aware. I'm not going to blame anybody. Our understanding was that it was a separate congregation meeting in the building, not a part of the congregation. And so that's part of the identifying that and what that looks like. So, but we do get an idea of what a good percentage, not as high as we'd like, but a good percentage of people said about the church and what that looks like. Now the breakdown here was 53% male, 47% female. Are you ready? This is a first. I mean, I have done thousands of these now, and we have never had more men fill the survey out than women. Good job, guys. Way to engage and participate in that process of doing that. Then we asked the question, how long have you been a Christ follower? We didn't describe that. In your own description, your own definition, how long have you been a Jesus follower? And you'll see here the breakdown. 93% have been Christians longer than 25 years. Well established in their faith. So whenever that happens, we always want to pay attention to how long have those folk attended this church? So we asked the question, how long have you attended this particular congregation? That breakdown was totally different. 24% in the last 5 years, 19% in 6 to 10, 11 to 15, etc. You'll discover that a good number, almost 52 or 53%, have been here less than 10 years. But in the same pattern to that, 93% have been Christians longer than 25 years. So what does that say? That tells us that those that have come into the church in the last 10 years come already established in their faith. It was just sheep changing pastures. For whatever the reason, move here, relocate, different church, whatever. But it was followers just finding this church to attend. Now, why do we point that out? Well, the reality is what got you here won't get you where you'd like to go. In reaching lost and broken people that are younger than 65, it's going to require things to be done differently. And that will mess us up because we like what we have. But what got you here won't get you there. So you have to ask yourself, is our desire to see lost and broken people stronger than our desire to be comfortable? Is our desire to reach young families and young people for Jesus stronger than our own personal comfort? I can't answer that. You all have to. What are you willing to do to reach your children and your grandchildren for Jesus? I'm going to tell you, I'm willing to do anything. Whatever that's going to take. I want to see my children, my grandchildren come to know Jesus. My prayer, I have 4 young grandchildren, 8 years and younger, that live in Idaho, and my prayer is there'll be a church that'll care enough about them to make necessary changes to reach them and share Jesus with them. And I know it's going to be different than what I've ever done. I have an 18-year-old grandson that lives with us. And I'm going to tell you, it takes a whole different world to reach him than it did when I was a teenager or when I was a youth pastor. He doesn't like to get up Sunday morning and go to church. So he goes to VR church every Sunday afternoon. VR, virtual reality, for you that may not be familiar. There's a church here in Southern California that does a service every Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock called Virtual Church. Kids from all over the country put on their headsets and they worship together. The pastor's outstanding. I've gone to church with him a few times. My headset in my office, his headset in his bedroom. But we go to church together. My avatar is not quite as cool as his. But we go to church together. Preaching's outstanding. The music is great. Pastor spends about an hour and a half after the service and has Q&A time with all the teenagers that have gathered from all across the country. They did not train me for that in seminary. That doesn't count, because they didn't go to church like I did. But I'm going to tell you, his questions are deep, and the place is challenging. It's different, isn't it? Now, I can tell him that doesn't count. If you don't get up at 9 o'clock, I don't care if you just went to bed at 4. If you don't get up at 9 o'clock and get to church, it doesn't count, right? Or you can begin to embrace different methods and different models of trying to do ministry today. More important than how he does it is the fact that he's going to get it to heaven someday. God, may there be a church. And if I need to be inconvenienced, I'm okay with that. See, what am I willing to do? Anything. What are you willing to do to see your kids and your grandkids come to know Jesus? Anything. Except that. We don't know what that is, but until it changes, right? But I'm going to tell you, that's what we're talking about here, is the idea of trying to figure out how to engage lost and broken people in a culture that's ever. I'm not saying do virtual church. It's a niche. It's a group of people that like that stuff. I'm not talking about that. But I am talking about how do you engage the people in your community that don't know Jesus. And what do we need to do different? All right, I'll quit preaching. Let me go back to the report. All right, lay summary survey, back to the distance traveled. This gives us an idea of what we call the ministry impact area of the church. Every church has an impact area, so we're trying to figure out what's yours. So we ask the question, how far do you drive to the church? And you'll see that the majority fit into that 8 miles or shorter. So within 8 miles, we call that the ministry impact area. The area you're most likely to impact is within an 8-mile radius. That doesn't mean you don't have some exposure, because you do, but we're talking about identifying that ministry impact area. Then we ask the question, your uniqueness, what kind of group of people are you most likely to reach? So we ask the question, how long are you married? Is it single, widowed, never single again, or never married? Kind of folk, and we discovered that 83% of the folk that participated were married, which means the church is most likely to reach a traditional family set. Okay, that's not a criticism, that's just the reality. So when we talk about our program, when we talk about our ministry, it says this is what we're designed to do. We're designed to reach a more traditional family set, just because it's who we are as a church. Then we said, okay, within this 8-mile radius around the church, who lives there? What does that begin to look like? And so we did a profile. Now, this is all included in your survey and a lot more detail, but let me just give you a couple summary things. There are 344,000 people that live within 8 miles of the church. The projected 5-year population change is 5%. Now, this is from the 2020 update. Now, given the reality in California right now, it may be a little different. In what that looks like. We've had 4 family members that have left California and moved to different places in the last year in doing that. So we're not sure if that's really true, but the idea is there's 344,000 people, 43% Anglo, 35% Hispanic, 10% Asian, 29% of those are under 20, 21 to 40, 27, 26. You can see the breakdowns. Why did we put that up there? Because we want you to compare it to the profile of your church. See, the current profile of your church doesn't match the profile of the 8-mile radius. It's a lot younger. The average age is 37.3. That's 3 years, almost full 3 years younger than the national average, which means it's a younger area, which means if we're going to really engage the community where God's planted us, we got to figure out how to do that. What does that begin to look like? The potential for children's ministry and youth ministry is unlimited. It's just a matter of whether we can make the necessary changes to figure out how to engage in a changing world. Now, when you look at some of the other things, 27% are college graduates. 24% of the homes, 1 out of 4, are led by single parents. The average income is $131,000. Now, y'all know no one makes the average. That's just the average household income within an 8-mile radius, considerably higher than the national average of $103,000. 45% have no faith involvement at all. So those 344,000 people, nearly half, have no faith involvement at all. And you talk about a mission field. Could you imagine if God planted you in the middle of an 8-mile radius where there are over 150,000 people that don't know Jesus? What would he ask us to do? How would he ask us to engage them? Oh, man, I'll mess you up. Just think about it when you're out walking around or going to the store or going to the restaurants next time. Nearly 1 out of every 2 people in that restaurant or in that store doesn't know Jesus. What a mission field. Man, what excitement that could be. I mean, can you imagine if you just reached 10% of them? Okay, how about 1% of them? What would happen if all of a sudden you had 1,500 new people who show up at your church? It'd mess you up. But the reality is, you're not going to reach everybody, but all of us ought to be reaching somebody. And together we can have a great kingdom impact in what that looks like. Then you had moderate faith, strong faith involvement, the overall church program preference. That means which is most likely to engage the lost and broken around you is a recreational-based ministry. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do sports, but it's a recreational-based ministry that has the greatest impact on what that looks like. And the church style is very contemporary. So in everything you do, both worship, music, everything you do, it's a very contemporary sound. It's a very contemporary look. It's a very contemporary way to do ministry. It's creative. It's innovative. It's asking, how do we engage lost and broken people in our community? It may not look like you've always done. And I hate giving suggestions because then people, oh, you want us to do that? And that's not what I'm saying. But it's trying to figure out how to do it in innovative kind of ways and what that begins to look like. You know, I've been around the Nazarene church long enough to know that there are a lot of folk that are died, committed to. Sunday morning is the only time you can do church, and it doesn't count if you do it any other time. That's not biblical. That's historical. Matter of fact, if you try to have a biblical argument about the Sabbath, you lose. It's not Sunday. Biblical concept of the Sabbath is Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown. That's a biblical concept of the Sabbath. Now, y'all know we changed it to Sunday. Why? To celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, man. That's why early Christians got together and said, He is risen. All right, whew, got a little nervous. That's how they greeted each other. That's why they got together on Sunday mornings, is to be able to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. And I love celebrating the resurrection of Jesus and what that looks like. But I found I can do that in all kinds of other times. I had a church up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho that decided we need to do church different than Sunday. We need to do it on Thursday night, especially during the summer. So starting Memorial Day to Labor Day, they took Sunday mornings off and had Thursday night church because everybody took off on the weekends and went camping and doing outdoor stuff. So instead of trying to guilt people because Sunday's the only time you go to church, they said, let's figure out a way, right? That's what we're talking about. How do you engage people in creative, innovative kind of ways that may not look like you've ever done it before? I'm making things new every day, Jesus said. I have come to complete the work of the Father. My job is to reach the lost and broken people. I've come to seek and to save those who are lost. That's what he's all about. He's asked you and I to be on mission with him. What does that look like to be creative? So I just want to give you permission. Be innovative. Be creative. Be why not people instead of why people all the time. God, what are you up to in that process? Then we asked the question, all right, what are the priorities that the church has? Now, this is where it got really interesting for us because we said, how do they currently exist? 1 being the most important thing, 5 being the least important, or 7 being the least important. You rank those on a scale of 1 to 7. Worship, fellowship, and prayer, by far, the most important things that you currently do that you really enjoy. And then missions, or community service, missions, discipleship, and evangelism. Lowest priority as they currently exist. So then we ask the question, how would you like them to be? What would you like to see happen? Because this begins to speak of the sense of urgency. Here's what you all said. You said we want prayer, worship, and evangelism and discipleship to be our 4 top things. Now you notice where evangelism was in the actual, and where all of a sudden it showed up in the preferred. So if you put these side by side, here's what it looks like. Prayer and worship, still high priorities. Evangelism, discipleship, to become a lot higher priorities. Now listen, what got you here won't get you here. That means we've got to be willing to change some things to make evangelism and discipleship higher priorities. So I told you, change is not a swear word, right? It's something we can embrace with hope-filled expectation of what that looks like. So given that reality, we ask a couple of questions. We said, do you think your church needs to change? Okay, change is not a swear word. It's a way to reach potential. Do you think it needs to change? We asked the question, do you think it needs radical change, significant change, some change, just a little, or no change at all? Here's where we begin to get really excited. There's a desire for the priorities to shift. There's also an understanding that what we're currently doing will not take us there, that we need some significant or radical change to make that happen. Okay, we understand that here, but when it actually happens, that's where we have a potential for resistance and what that begins to look like. But the good news is our heart's in the right place. We understand the need. Then we ask the question, how open are you to outside help to make that happen? And here's what you said, we need not only help, we need intervention, or we need assistance right now. Again, 75% said, listen, we get it. We've got to do things differently, and we need help to figure out how to do it. We get excited about that, and certainly Wes being here, he gets excited about that, because if it was the opposite, we would say, you know, we're probably done here. If people don't want outside help, or they don't want any assistance, then we're not beating our heads against the wall. But here's the good news. People want it. There's a desire to see lost and broken people come to know Jesus. We know what we're doing is not going to help us to accomplish our priorities. We know that we're going to need some help to be able to get there. Woo! That's good news. Because the heart's in the right place. We have the right attitude. We have a great understanding. Then we begin to ask this question, how willing are you to engage in the process? Right? So it's one thing to say, yeah, we need to change. Because here's what I've learned. Everybody's okay changing everybody else's stuff. Just don't mess with my stuff, and you don't even know what my stuff is until they change it. Right? In doing that. So we said, how willing are you to engage in this process? And this is where we got, again, more excited, because 20% said, hey, well, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Mess my stuff up, I'm okay. Whatever I can, 44%. So 64% of the people said, hey, listen, I'm ready to do this. Now, there is some resistance. There are some down here that said, hey, listen, I'm not so sure about all this. Because you have early adopters, mid adopters, late adopters, and never adopters. So those are kind of the scale of what we have. You build a movement with early adopters or mid adopters. That's how you build a movement for health, is by those that are willing to look at that. And so we got excited about that. There's a good percentage of people that are willing to step up. Then we ask the question, how willing are you to give? How willing are you to really engage in this process? 15% said, I'm willing to sacrifice. 37%, I'm willing to give generously. 44% I'll tithe and help on certain projects. I'll give a little extra if it's really needed, or I'm tapped out. The good news is there's a good, strong financial support for the church. Now, the problem is the needs of the church are significant in its operating budget. Just in managing the debt and all of the kind of things that you do, it's a challenge to do that. But the good news is there's strong support for the church financially and what that looks like. So that's healthy and what that looks like. And then we asked a couple questions about church engagement. And this is a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being all the time, or not at all, 5 being all the time. Just talking a little bit about your church engagement. I know what's expected of me, down to someone has talked to me about my spiritual life, which, again, whenever anything gets below that 3 mark, we take note of that. So the reality is accountability and spiritual conversations may not always be happening in a regular basis. You know, where we're asking each other, okay, what are you learning right now from God's word that's challenging you? What did God correct in your life this week? So the spiritual conversations, or we can begin to really get deeper. And I've invited somebody to church in the last 60 days. Again, that number was pretty low at 2.12, which means the passion for the church isn't necessarily translating into a place of inviting friends, family, and others to attend. So part of what we have to do is talk about how to increase what that looks like. Then we gave you an open-ended questionnaire. We gave you no suggestions. We just asked you to write down whatever you wanted to write down. And we processed all that information and came up with what we call trends or themes that were most often stated. And so it had to get to 10% before it actually made the list. And then we said, okay, what are some of the things that are there? We asked, one question was, what are the achievements? What's the church currently doing well? Here's what you said, love and care for one another. That's proven out in the church health scores as well. Senior adult ministry, children's ministry, we're welcoming and friendly. Every church says that. Welcoming and friendly. And we like Sunday school and Bible study as some things we're doing really well. Then we said, what are the hindrances? What are the things that are keeping the church from its full potential? Here are the things that you mentioned. In that, lack of strong leadership, lack of young families, little evangelism, average age of the congregation, lack of a lead pastor, lack of volunteers, music, finances, lack of vision were the things that were mentioned most often when it came to hindrances. You'll notice that many of these we've already talked about in certain other parts of the assessment. This just affirms the rest of the assessment as being correct, that we have this desire. We want to see that happen. Then we ask, what goals would you get excited about? Any goal you want to put down, you could put down. Small groups and discipleship growing, shared vision, improved music, community outreach, outreach to young families, finding a new pastor. That makes this list all the time. Every church in transition wants to do that. And facility improvements were some of the things that were mentioned as goals that you could personally get excited about. It gives us an idea of where the church is at, what the attitude of the congregation is. Then we asked, how would you describe your church? We didn't say positive or negative. We said, how would you describe the character of your church? Declining or lack of direction or sad was the thing that was mentioned most often. Loving and caring, friendly and welcoming, told you, inward focused, and we're surviving were the things that were mentioned most often as themes of how we describe the church. So some positive things as far as interrelationships go, a little more negative about direction and vision of where the church is headed. Then we said, what do you think the purpose of the church is? And here's what you said. In doing that, evangelism and lives transformed, 52%, love and serving people, and discipleship were the other things that were mentioned as the purpose of the church. Here's the reality. We have to admit it. If evangelism and lives transformed is the goal of the church, the purpose of the church, we have to admit that we've not been doing that. See, if we don't acknowledge it, we'll just pretend like everything's okay. The reality is, if we're going to live out the purpose, we've got to figure out how to engage lost and broken people. Then we said, what would you like to change? If you could change anything, what would you like to change? And here's the things that were mentioned most often: music, facility improvements, developing a vision, outward community focus, an emphasis on prayer, church leadership, and reaching younger families were things that were mentioned most often as things I'd like to change personally. Now, I can just tell you, when it came to music, it's not a consensus of what that change should be. Right? Everybody has an opinion of what that should look like. But as an overall concept, it's the music. Some want it more traditional, more contemporary. Some want it different. Some would rather not see the screen and have hymnals or whatever that begins to look like. And then we asked the question, what's the church's reputation in the community? 34% said, I'm not sure if we have a reputation within the community, or if we do, we're not known. People just don't know about us. And if somebody does, it's because of some of the outreach stuff that we have done in doing that. So the idea is the church appears to be a little bit invisible to the very community, this 8-mile radius community. If you did a survey of those 334,000 people, how many would know that Gateway Church of the Nazarene exists? And if so, why does it exist? That's part of our messaging, part of what we have to work on. Then we talk about what are the felt needs in the community. These are the things that were mentioned: a need for a Savior, a place to connect, programs for kids, food ministry, or homelessness were the things that were mentioned most often. I can tell you right now, the need for a Savior is not a felt need. It's a real need, but if it was a felt need, every church in this community would be packed. That's not it's a real need, but unless you figure out how to meet the felt needs, the real needs will never be addressed. Because the gospel becomes good news when needs are met that are real. that people are experiencing in their lives to do that. And then we talk about desired strengths of a new pastor, solid biblical preaching, relational, strong leadership, biblical knowledge were the things that were mentioned most often as what we'd like to see in our next pastor. This will help shape that profile as you begin the pastoral search process. Then we said what keeps you in the church, people, relationships, commitment, tradition, a place to serve, doctrine and beliefs. You notice what I said earlier? This whole idea of people and relationships and a place to serve, always, it's supposed to be 27%, not 275, whatever that is. 27% commitment and tradition, just because it's a habit. It's what I do. The older the congregation, the higher that score is in tradition, because it's our comfort, which is what we've always done in doing that. All right, now let me get to the place where we're going to start wrapping up now and talk a little bit about first impressions. These are just some things from the weekend. We get it. Nothing's normal right now, and so what we try to do is just acknowledge this is one Sunday. We're not saying it's always this way, but this one particular weekend that we were here, here are some of the things that we took a look at. Now, one of the things I don't do on the assessment report night is talk a lot about facility. Now, there's a whole section in the report on facility and suggestions and ideas and observations on the facility. We never do that tonight, because here's what happens. When a church doesn't know what to do to reach lost and broken people, they do something to their building. Because if they shine up their fish tank, they think fish will jump in. Right? But you all know fish don't jump into tanks. You actually have to put them there. And so it's the idea that can become an excuse. I've been around a lot of district assemblies and a lot of pastors' reports, and I'm going to tell you, if I hear one more pastor say the highlight of our year is we remodeled the bathroom, I think I'm going to throw up, man. It's like, that's it? There's got to be something more than that. So we don't talk a lot about facility tonight. It's there, gives you some suggestions, but don't let that become an excuse for reaching lost and broken people. Jesus said, open your eyes, look into the fields that are ripe unto harvest. It's time to get in the field, even if the equipment's not quite ready yet. It's time to harvest and what that looks like. So when we talk about facility, let me just give you a couple of general observations. It's an attractive facility, has excellent potential for serving and impacting the community. You have resources, and to whom much has been given, much is required to use for mission work, not just comfort work, but to really engage people in what that looks like. There is a need to improve signage for guests to create a more welcoming environment, trying to figure out how to come in and where to come in and navigate where I'm going can be a bit of a challenge, and what that begins to look like. I waited until Wes got here before I pulled in because I didn't know where I was supposed to go. It's like, I don't know, what door do I go in, and where do I park, and all those kind of things that are part of that. But anyway, it's doing that. There's a need to improve that signage. There's a need to update some of the flooring and ceiling tiles, some of the outdoor furniture stuff that was there for that Sunday. Just, it's that general update. Be ready for guests. I don't know if it's like this at your house. When you have company, you actually get ready for them. Right? I mean, you actually, I live in Arizona, so we have a lot of people that come during the wintertime. I've become really popular, but it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with the weather and the fact that they can get a little break, right? And so we call it our hotel because, you know, people are coming, they're going to the Grand Canyon, they're doing all kinds of stuff, and they kind of sit. But I'm going to tell you, every time somebody comes, we actually get ready for them. When we clean the guest room, even though it was cleaned last time, we redo it. When they come, we actually act like we're ready for them. It's the same thing here with the church, talking about being guest friendly and what that looks like. So spring cleaning, some TLC throughout is needed. It's just shaping and sharpening so that it says to the guests, we expected you. We're waiting for you. We are glad that you're here because we anticipated your arrival. So, and there's some other things you can look at in a lot more detail. Now, let me talk a little bit about Sunday morning. There were no greeters at the Sunday school hour. They were in place for the service, but not for Sunday school, which simply says to a guest, you're not welcome to come to Sunday school. We don't mean that, right? We don't mean that, right? It's okay. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe. So it's an idea of being ready for guests, anticipating their arrival. You say, well, we haven't had a guest in Sunday school. I know, because you're not ready. So we're going to be prepared for them. and what that looks like. The size and the shape of the lobby makes it a challenge for interaction inside. It's just so small, and there's a traffic flow and all those kind of pieces. I remember, and it's years ago, but when we came to visit here the first time, we walked from the hallway right outside. That's where the coffee was, that's where cookies were, that's where all the stuff was outside, and we just hung out under that little patio out there before church started. It was just a flow. We all walked that way. I don't know if that was a special Sunday or whatever that was, but it was a place to get people from the parking lot to the actual fellowship place. You know, where you want to, I'm not saying you should do that. It's just one of those impressions that we had when we came that particular Sunday several years ago. Much more signage inside and out is needed. We talked a little bit about that already. Children were welcomed and excited and energy, and they were served well in the children's ministry. And that was done exceptionally well that particular Sunday. I'm assuming that happens every Sunday? Oh, good. It was good that Sunday as well in doing that. We'll talk a little bit about the worship service. Once it started, welcome and announcement was done well. People engaged, but it'd probably be better to start the service with a little music to get people in the right climate and atmosphere and not have all that at the beginning, because guests can disengage, because that's family business. It's family time. It's talking about what we're doing in doing that. But you only get one chance to make a good first impression for a guest in doing that. Music was basically a good quality, but some balance issues. The team members needed more engagement, less confined to their music stands. Now, I don't know if you all know, Darla is a worship leader by trade. She has led worship at churches, large churches all across the United States and the Church of the Nazarene. So she looks at this a whole lot different than I do when I do worship evaluation. She looks at more of the technical stuff and what's happening. And y'all know, if you're a slave to the music stands, you can't engage people and what that begins to look like. And so that's what she noticed in doing that. There was a passionate prayer time, but the background music that particular Sunday was a little loud. And it was really hard to not be distracted that particular Sunday. Visuals were well done. Occasionally the text was too small. Light color, it was a little difficult to read that Sunday. Given the age of the congregation, it may be helpful to have larger font. Hey, I'm there, man. So it's been able to read it, right? And what that looks like. While some participated, the energy level was low. There was no direction given for children's to exit for children's church. They just got up and left. Again, look at it from a guest perspective. Where are they going? You know, who rang the bell? I mean, what, you know, that church people get it, guests don't. They just think it's kind of weird. All the kids get up and left. Were they mad? Did they get discouraged? Why did they leave? No kids allowed in this church. That whole climate, but it's that idea of doing that. People were engaged during the message, seemed to really enjoy and begin to respond to that as well. Now, the other part of first impressions is your website, your social media, those kind of pieces and what that looks like. There's a well-maintained and regularly updated website. It would be helpful to have a link on the website to worship services and other social media venues. Right now, you can't find your other social media where you do a lot of your stuff from the website. So you have to go find it on the social media site. So on the website, having links that link you to the Facebook page, to your YouTube channel, et cetera, would be incredibly helpful. Adding some video content would make the site more interactive as opposed to just static information. So figuring out how to be interactive and what that looks like. I would just mention, front and center on your website right now is a mask requirement. You probably haven't been to it. Encourage you to go to it. It says if you want to come to church here, you have to wear a mask. So as of yesterday when we finished the report. So just want to encourage you that maybe not something you want to make your first impression. You know, that's what you see when you open the webpage, that there it is. And so every church has to do what it's going to do. But you ask yourself, is that what we want to communicate to people? At this stage in life, I would just say, you need to, if people want to wear a mask, wear a mask. If you don't want to wear a mask, don't wear a mask. Whatever you want to do, that's okay. Or whatever you're going to say. But the way it's worded right now, I was actually a little leery. I thought I was going to have to present in a mask tonight. Because I've had to do that over the last 2 years and what that looks like. So paying attention to that can help. The Facebook page has 818 likes, 893 people follow it. Man, that ought to be a place that you engage often. There's so many, nearly 900 people that will get notifications when you do stuff within your Facebook page. That's pretty significant. The page is updated regularly for announcements and the worship video feeds that are included in your Facebook page and what that looks like. The church's YouTube channel has 268 subscribers. It's used to share the 2 Sunday services and the children's worship tools that are a part of that. The new front door of the church is the online presence. People will Google you before they ever pull into your parking lot. So you got to ask, what does it say when people find us? Does it communicate what we want to communicate? Is it a good front door? Just as much energy is put into a facility needs to be put into your online presence. Now, we didn't find Instagram or MeWe or TikTok or any of the other social media platforms. You may have those channels. We just didn't find them as we began to look through. And you all know if you want to reach younger folk, you've got to figure out a different method than Facebook. The fastest demographic on Facebook is 55-year-old women and older. So if you want to reach that 30-year-old, you're going to have to figure out how to do Instagram. If you want to reach those that are in their 20s, TikTok. And if you want to figure out how to reach teenagers, good luck. Because they use everything. Whether it's their online stuff or whatever it is. It's always changing. My kids use Instagram, but allow their Instagram to be posted on their Facebook so grandma and grandpa can see the kids' pictures. It's just done automatically, but they don't even use it. And so it's just a matter of figuring out different ways to communicate. What does that begin to look like? Because you can take the same content and just put it on a different venue that people are actually using. So when somebody Googles you, what do they find? How can we be more creative in doing that? All right? So those are just observations from first impressions. Now that's one weekend. It's one observation, one set of eyes. What we want to do is just encourage you to take a look at what that looks like. So now when you get the report tomorrow or next weekend, when you get a printed copy, you can skip the first 23 pages. Because that's what I just did. So you can jump right to page 24 and read the summary of conclusions, and hopefully they'll make sense to you. And if you want to, you can just skip the first 31 pages and go to page 32, which is the recommendations, and that's what you really count anyway. Right? So we get it. That's what people want to know. What's the recommendations? But unless you hear the heart, none of that's going to matter because it won't make sense. So then we set up recommendations. Now, I'm not going to go through all those tonight. There are only 3 pages, single space, but there's only 3 pages of recommendations. They are for the transition team to work on over the next several months during this interim process. So there is an overall observation. Now, the first 23 pages has been your data that we've reported. Now we start into our interpretation of the condition of the church, all right? So we're shifting now from your data to our observations, the things that we've done, all right? So starting on page 32, you'll find a set of overall observations in the report. I'm going to go through those real quick, just kind of give you an idea of what we're talking about, and then I'll hit the highlights of the recommendations. So there's 10 of those. The church has a rich history. Countless numbers of lives have been impacted through the history of the church. I mean, there are lots of people going to heaven because of the ministry of this church. That's good news, man. Aren't you glad? Man, that's exciting. And most of you here have been impacted by the ministry of this church some way or another, and we give God the glory. Most agree that senior adult ministries are effective in reaching, and that the music ministry requires some continued evaluation and increased excellence to most impact leading people in worship. The facility provides great potential with some time and effort to declutter, repair, update some areas. The building can be leveraged well to serve the ministry and the needs of the community. The recent decline in attendance, the lack of clear vision for the future, and the impact of COVID has resulted in the development of an inward focus where protecting what we have has become more important than investing in the future. 5, if the church is to move back into a growth zone, it will require honest evaluation, creating a culture of innovation, empowering leaders more effectively, and discovering new ways to engage the community. 6, there are those who are comfortable with the current reality of the church, which may result in the resistance to any change. Need to be aware. 7, there are some who are anxious about the future of the church and believe there are things that need to change if the church is going to continue to have an impact. So there are those that may resist, but there's also others that say, listen, if we don't, we're done. Right? So you get that. That's a real dichotomy that exists. Most agree that reaching the younger generation is essential to the survival and the thriving of the church. Many realize the need to determine a clear vision and a direction for the church to move forward. Most would like to see the church engage the community more effectively as needs are assessed and ministry priorities adjusted so that the church can recapture a forward-looking vision instead of a backward-looking vision. What would that look like? What's involved in all of that? So to help us accomplish some of the things that the assessment report reveals, we're going to make some recommendations. And probably the most significant of those, as far as what you all need to be totally aware of, because the transition team will help clarify, is the establishment of a transition team. Now that transition team is going to be recommended by the TIPS pastor, will be empowered by the church board. All the church board members here, could you raise your hand for a moment? I need to look you all in the eye for just a second. All right, all the church board members? All right, good. All right, I want you to look up here. Lean in, ready? The church board will empower the transition team to implement the recommendations of the assessment report. All right? Not ask for suggestions, not ask for approving what they're going to do, but you're going to empower them to take a look at and make the necessary changes. Now, I've tried to say that as clear as I can for the last 20 years, and still there's some board members that say, oh, I didn't know we were going to do that. So we either trust people or we don't trust people. Worst thing in the world is to have a group of people that are sweating this thing out, praying like crazy, discovering what it is that God wants, only to have somebody that wasn't involved in the process make a decision that it's not a good idea. So we're going to empower them up front. Now, we also, on that team, it will be made up of some board members. So some of you that are on the church board currently will serve with others on that transition team. The idea is to have a balance of leadership styles and personalities, creativity, builders, as well as innovators that are part of that team that can pull off making the necessary adjustments to move towards health. That's the goal, is to be healthier at the end of this process than we are currently. No matter where we're at, we're going to be healthier. And we're not going to get to the complete end of it, but we'll start that process. So that team is empowered. It will also be commissioned before the congregation, where prayer support will be recruited for that team. We don't want this team to be a backroom secret society. It's going to be open, transparent, conversations like crazy with the entire congregation. They're not there to make some radical choices. They're here to engage the church in making needed changes to help the church be as healthy as it can be. So to facilitate that, there's a second set of recommendations, and that's in spiritual renewal. Here's what we know. Prayer does not prepare us for greater works. It is the greater work. Everything that we do, every decision that is made, every conversation that is had, has to be and must be bathed in prayer. Corporate prayer, personal prayer, there'll be seasons of prayer that you'll be called to. There'll be times of fasting that you'll be called to. The idea is to hear what God is saying and be willing to adjust our lives to join Him. And that's harder said than done. We're willing to adjust our lives to join what God is doing. So spiritual renewal, there's some recommendations there about creating an environment of spiritual renewal. And then the third set of recommendations is in the area of church health. I've already talked a lot about those when we talked about church health and some of the areas that we're going to address. So we take a look at empowering leadership, gift-based ministry together, effective structures, inspiring worship. There are a couple of things in loving relationships and holistic small groups that aren't major deals, but they are some things that we suggest that you look at doing to create a coming back together. And then starting in the area of need-oriented evangelism, community needs assessment, those kind of things that are a part of the recommendations. All right, so in church health. The next set of recommendations deal with communication and celebration. Here's what we just pour into our TIPS pastors all the time. We're going to communicate, 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 and communicate some more. If somebody doesn't know something, it will not be for a lack of communicating. It'll be a lack of, I don't engage in that process. But we're going to have some town hall meetings, and we're going to have open conversations, some small group meetings, and some Sunday school classes, different kinds of things that allow you to speak into and hear the process and progress of the interim time. We don't want anybody surprised by anything that happens. We want there to be unity and agenda harmony together, and the way to build that is communication. Now, the second part of that is we're going to learn to party. Hey, we're going to celebrate. Man, we're people of hope. And as people of hope, we're going to learn to party and celebrate what God has done. When God shows up, when goals are accomplished, when things happen, we're going to celebrate and we're going to rejoice. Now, you may do it vocally or you may be a quiet celebrator. But we're going to get an environment that says it's okay to be who you are, but we're going to party. You say, well, why party? Because heaven, the Bible tells us heaven parties and rejoices over one that was lost that's now found. I want you to imagine. I don't know what heaven's going to be like, but I'm going to tell you it's going to be a party. It's going to be rejoicing and celebrating what God's people are doing down here as long as he delays coming. Every time somebody comes and found, there's a party. All of heaven rejoices. So we ought to practice now rejoicing and having a party for what God has done. And when God shows up and does something, we don't just go, oh, that's nice. We celebrate it. When that lost person is found, when that goal is achieved, when some objective is accomplished, we're going to party and celebrate and rejoice. Because there's nothing that will build positive momentum than a group of people that learn to celebrate. Have you ever been to a ball game? I'm an avid baseball fan, so it's been my life. I played ball in high school and college, and it's been my life. I love baseball, and I'm going to tell you, I've had the opportunity to see some games that are incredible. I was at the '84 World Series when the Detroit Tigers won over San Diego. You probably all don't remember that, but we do. We lived in that moment. I was at the stadium on Sunday afternoon. Sunday afternoon at the stadium, I got to watch. I saw 32 games in 1984. We had a guy in our church that had season tickets, and he always took me, and we just had a blast. And I'm going to tell you, when Kirk Gibson hit the home run into the right field bleachers on that Game 7, I did not go, that was nice. Man, I'm hugging people and giving people high fives I don't even know. Isn't it amazing how contagious celebration is? Creates a climate. That's what we're talking. And I'm not talking, you don't have to do chest bumps and high fives, but we got to learn to party. And so celebration becomes really important. The last piece that we talk about is this whole first impressions piece and the facility stuff. There's a couple of recommendations there just on some not major deals, but some sprucing and spring cleaning and taking a look at signage and those kind of things, and then reviewing your online presence to see how you can improve it, to make sure that what people find is really telling your story and what that looks like. So there are all those recommendations are in those sections. We try to make the recommendations general enough to allow for fingerprints of the transition team, but specific enough to give direction. So that's always our goal. So general enough to allow fingerprints, but specific enough to give direction to the transition team in doing that. It'll be the transition team that'll really work through these and determine how it's best delivered in the context and culture of your church. Because every church is different and what that looks like and how it's done. So here's what I know and what I believe. God is not done with his church yet. He's not done. He's always had a church, and he always will have a church. The question is, will we be his church, or will we be our church? Will we be a country club that gathers for comfort, or will we be a group of people on mission following his vision to impact our community. The potential is unlimited here. You have people resources, you have financial resources, you have facility resources. Man, live into that potential and just be amazed at what God does. This is a great season to be part of Gateway Church. It's a great season to be here. We don't wring our hands in despair. We open our hands up to be obedient to whatever God says. Amen? So I would encourage you, be a part of those early adopters. Be a part of those that say, count me in. I'll do whatever I can. I'll be engaged wherever I can. Because I want our church to be as healthy as it possibly can be to reach as many people as we possibly can so the kingdom of God can be expanded. Can I pray with you? Father, we are grateful today for your church. And we count it such an incredible privilege to be a part of your church. We thank you for the Gateway Church. We thank you for its history. We thank you for all the experiences that they've had, good and bad and everything in between. It's brought them to this point. It's brought this group of people to a place to say, God, what's next for us? So I pray that your Holy Spirit would guide and direct us. I pray that you'd give wisdom beyond ourselves, that you'd give us the ability to see what can be and the courage to go and make it so. So my prayer for each one is to be radically obedient to whatever you would reveal in these days during transition. I pray a blessing upon Wes as he leads, upon this church board as it guides, upon this transition team as it implements. May your will be done. And for all that happens, we'll give you the glory and the honor and the praise. For it's in the mighty name, the hopeful name of Jesus we pray. And all of God's people together said, amen and amen. Hey, God bless you. Thanks for letting me be here. I'm 7 minutes over, but I started 5 minutes late. So we're all good. God bless you.